This is arguably the most important job interview of your life. If you get the job, your life is going to be unrecognisably different than if you don't get the job. So you want to take this interview seriously and prepare for it more than you ever prepared for any job interview before. But then when it comes to the actual interview, you have to let go of wanting to control how the interview goes. For example, I had planned to present a 2-minute pitch on my proposal, and 2 days before the interview I decided to scrap this idea. I'd rehearsed the whole thing and had it memorised, but suddenly realised that I was missing the point of the interview. The point of being interviewed is that I am not in control, the interviewers are in control. It's up to the interviewers to tell me how high to jump, and my preparation means that whatever they ask of me, however high or whichever hoop they ask me to jump through, I can be like, oh yeah, sure, I can do that, no problem. Another way to think about prepping is in the counterfactual of how you'd feel in the interview if you haven't prepared as much as possible. If you haven't prepared and they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, then you're likely to prang out in the interview, get super anxious and headsy about the fact that if you would have prepared, you would have known the answer to the question. If instead you have done all the preparation, then even when they do ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, the purpose of preparing is that it gives you the ability to know that you don't know the answer, and they probably know that you don't know the answer. And so it's about thinking on your feet, and that is a totally different mindset to have that when being asked exactly the same question. So do the preparation, not because you expect all the questions to come up in the interview, but just so you're ready to jump as high as they need you to jump. Tactic number 2. Ask your prospective supervisor for guidance. Use your supervisor for the fountain of knowledge and experience that they are. If your supervisor has worked at the faculty for many years, it's likely that they know what the interviews are going to be like, and they're also likely to know where your weaknesses are that you need to improve. They will have seen many PhD students come and go in their time, and will be able to give you feedback on areas of your research proposal that you might need to improve, or identify gaps in your theoretical knowledge that you will need to plug before the big day. I can't know exactly what those things will be, but they're likely to be there, and your supervisor is probably in the best position to give you that feedback. All it takes is an email from your supervisor to give you a steer for your interview prep. So send the email. Which leads me on to my next tactic. Tactic number 3. Anticipate improvements to your research proposal. It's highly likely that the research proposal you submit in your funding and university application will not be completely perfect. Shock? I know. My supervisor said that mine was a throw the kitchen sink proposal. Essentially, I'd tried to pack as much as I could into my original proposal because I felt like this was my one shot, so I wanted to cover as much ground as possible. Apparently, this is common for a lot of PhD students starting out, and what this meant for me was that I needed to simplify my research proposal. Simplifying my proposed design and splitting out my project into multiple sequential experiments proved to be incredibly useful. In my interview, the interviewers commented on how complex my original proposal was and asked how I would simplify this. Thankfully, I had anticipated for this and had several improvements for how I would simplify my design. Acknowledging that your research proposal is not the finished article is pivotal for successful interview performance. Again, your supervisor is best placed to give you feedback on what might improve your research proposal. Tactic number 4. Remember, your interviewers won't remember your application. This is a counterintuitive one, but it's quite important to remember when you're actually in the interview. Because we spend so much time going through our research proposals with a fine-tooth comb, we have such an in-depth knowledge of our application, and we can mistakenly project that our interviewers will have that same amount of knowledge about our application. But be real, your interviewers are busy, high-profile academic researchers who have 1,000 things to do at any one time. It's likely that they've read your application once before the interview, and they may not remember specific features of your experimental design. You've got to remember as well that they are likely to be running multiple interviews on the day of your interview, and so there's no way they're going to be able to remember everyone's applications in high resolution detail. So help them out. When you talk about your research proposal, give one sentence of context about your experimental design. Recap what the variables are, and don't get hung up on the tiny details, because they're going to be focused on the big picture. Which leads me on to tactic number 5. Emphasize your number one most important unique selling point. In the same way that your interviewers are unlikely to remember your application before the interview, you have to accept that they are unlikely to remember much of what you said after the interview. So if you can choose one thing for your interviewers to remember about your research proposal, what is that one thing going to be? Look through your research proposal and try to identify the most important new idea which you're proposing. What has no one thought of before that really interests you, and why do you think that one thing is super important? In my interview, the salient idea that I was proposing as part of my research caught the attention of my interviewers so much that they went off script for a few minutes. They asked me some additional questions about it, and they acknowledged that although they wanted to talk more about it, we needed to return to the structured questions. That's the kind of engagement you want to get from your idea. Then you know they are going to remember you because you gave them a new perspective. So think about it. If you could condense your whole research proposal down to one core, simple idea that no one has done before, what is it? Okay, tactic number 6. Research your interviewer's research experience. Okay, this is super important. Show an interest in your interviewer's work and what their research specialties are. It's smart to understand how their research experience overlaps with what you're proposing to do in your PhD. For example, one of my interviewers was a world-leading expert in the area I was interested in, so there were times in my answers where I would literally reference their papers to show them that I know that they know more than me. It's partly about what it's about. It's just about signaling to the interviewers that you know that they know more than you, but that you're grateful that they're showing an interest in your ideas. And that's what the scientific method is built on. It's a balance of accepting that we know a lot, but that there's still a lot that we don't know. If your interviewers are scientists worth their salt, they'll be curious to see whether your ideas make them think differently about their research. Also remember that who your interviewers are is not luck. There's a high probability that the faculty will choose people who have an in-depth knowledge of your field of research. So it's a wise move to know what they've been up to. Are they still researching today? Do they run a lab? Or do they spend most of their time teaching nowadays? Which were their most influential papers? And in their papers, what do they recommend for future research? And in those recommendations, does your PhD speak to any of those future recommendations? You might literally only mention their research once, or not even at all, but it's better to have prepared and know what their research experience is than going blind and potentially make yourself look like a fool. If you're successful in your PhD application, then your interviewers are most likely to become future colleagues. Showing an interest in their work is simply a sign of respect. Tactic number 7. Be humble and accept you need help. You're not meant to be an accomplished researcher by the time you start your PhD, so don't pretend to be one in the interview. It's important to acknowledge that you're aware of your blind spots and that you need help strengthening these areas. For me, I acknowledged that I needed help simplifying my experimental design, and I also acknowledged that I needed skilling up in the fundamentals of computational neuroscience. Your interviewers will be asking themselves whether you are moldable, whether you are coachable. Of course, they want to see that you've got some quality raw materials to work with, but they will also want to see that your potential is malleable and that you're open to new ideas, new ways of doing things, and to lots of hard work. Okay, tactic number 8. Practice describing a previous research project. This is a simple but a goodie. One thing you can almost guarantee they will ask you about is what research experience you have. In my interview, they asked me to describe one research project focusing on the research question I was looking to answer, the methods I used to answer it, and what I found out. So practice talking about a past research project of yours within this framework. If you've got experience doing multiple research projects, then great, practice talking about each one and see which one feels best. Which one shows you in the best light, and which one has allowed you to make the biggest contribution to the field. This might sound easy to do, but actually summarizing an entire research project in less than 1 minute is difficult. Practice condensing down the key insights and then try explaining it to a friend who has no prior context with your work, and see if they understand what you're saying. You've got to find the balance between giving enough context so they know the significance of the research, but not too much that your listener loses interest or gets bored. Which leads me on to tactic number 9. Get your friends to help role-play interview questions with you. This helps you in 2 ways. One is that you get to practice your answers to interview questions and get to feel how they sound when you're actually in the moment, and your friends can give you feedback on your answers. If you have a friend who's already done a PhD, then definitely ask them for role-play help. Otherwise, it's time to call in some favours with friends that owe you one. You can give them a long list of questions to pick from, or you can ask them to prepare their own questions so you don't know what they're going to ask. If you've got a friend who has research experience, then definitely get them to prepare some questions you haven't seen before. That way, you get to practice thinking on your feet and responding in the moment. This leads on to the second way roleplay helps. It gives you practice at the experience of answering questions in interview conditions. Even just playing a pretend interview with a friend will get your heart pumping, and when they ask you a question you haven't thought of, trust me, your cortisol levels will be rising. This is what you want to feel before the interview. You want to practice in interview conditions so that the day itself doesn't feel scary anymore. And tactic number 10, prepare interesting research-based questions. Finally, when it comes to the final part of the interview, when they ask if you have any questions, do not be generic. This is their last interaction with you in the interview, so try to make it memorable. In my interview, I asked 1 culture-based question and 1 research-based question. If you've researched your interviewer's experience beforehand, then maybe come up with a question about their research or about their field of interest. Otherwise, look at broader trends in your research domain and see if you can come up with something interesting. Okay, so to sum up, these are the 10 tactics for a successful PhD interview. Tactic number 1, plans are useless, but planning is essential. 2, ask your prospective supervisor for guidance. 3, anticipate improvements to your research proposal. 4, remember that your interviewers won't remember your application. Number 5, emphasize your number 1 most important unique selling point. Number 6, research your interviewer's research experience. Number 7, be humble and accept you need help. Number 8, practice describing a previous research project. Number 9, role play with your mates. And number 10, prepare interesting research-based questions. All right, I'll see you soon.